4 true chilling apartment horror stories. Welcome to DTC, Dark Timeless Creeps, where we explore the darkest corners of the unknown, uncovering tales that send chills down your spine. Our channel delves into the eerie, the mysterious, and the unexplainable, sharing spine-tingling stories that haunt the soul. In this episode, we bring you 4 true chilling apartment horror stories that will make you think twice about the places you call home. These are real accounts of terrifying experiences within the confines of everyday living spaces, where the walls may hide more than just secrets. Brace yourself for a journey into the sinister side of apartment living. Number 1. The Man in the Dark. It was the summer of 2005 when my life changed forever in a way that would haunt me for years to come. I was in my early 20s at the time, full of the innocence and optimism that comes with youth. My mother, a woman of deep faith and strong convictions, lived alone in a modest apartment on a quiet street in Jackson, Mississippi. The apartment, though small and dated, had a certain charm. One of those places where you can imagine stories unfolding in its dark corners and quiet hallways. But while my mother loved her home, there was always something unsettling about it. It wasn't the kind of unsettling you could point to or explain away. It was my mother's roommate, a musician, was often away on business trips, leaving my mother home alone most weekends. I could tell that my mother didn't always enjoy the solitude. Sometimes late at night, I would call her just to hear her voice, and she would mention the creaking of the old building or the strange way the wind howled through the cracks in the windows. But that Sunday night in 1979, it was not the wind or the creaking of she had gone to bed early that evening, trying to shake off the nagging anxiety that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The night was strangely quiet, and the silence seemed to stretch for hours. As she lay there, eyes half closed, she began to drift into a light sleep. The darkness around her felt heavy, almost oppressive, but she was too tired to fight it. Then, in the midst of her drifting, at first it was just a sound, just a gentle rustle in the other room. She paused, straining to listen. Maybe it was the neighbor coming home late, or maybe it was nothing at all. But then it came again, the slow, deliberate creak of the front door. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her heart pounded. She held her breath, listening intently as the door slowly opened and closed. This time, it wasn't her roommate. Her friend was out of town for the weekend. There was no friendly greeting, no soft footsteps approaching the bedroom, just the eerie sound of someone else entering. At that moment, fear gripped my mother. Her heart was pounding, and she could feel the weight of each passing second. There was no doubt now, someone was in the apartment and they weren't supposed to be there. She lay still, holding her breath, hoping that whoever it was would leave. The apartment had only one bedroom, and the only other space was the small kitchen, separated by a thin wall. There was no way out. The back door, with each passing second, the presence of the intruder seemed to grow stronger, closer. She could hear the faint rustling of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, as if the person was deliberately trying not to make a sound. My mother's mind raced, her thoughts clouded with panic. She was no stranger to fear, but this was different. This was the kind of terror that seeped into her bones, that drove every action. In that terrifying moment, my mother did the only thing she could think of. She prayed. She wasn't sure why, but in the face of such paralyzing fear, prayer had always been her crutch. So she whispered the words, hoping for comfort, for clarity, for protection. As she prayed, something miraculous happened. It didn't happen right away, but slowly her panic began to subside. Her racing heart slowed, and a strange calm came over her. The fear didn't go away, but it became more manageable, as if the presence of something larger, something protective, was standing beside her, giving her the strength to endure. She remained perfectly still, every muscle in her body straining to keep still. The silence was long, thick, oppressive. And then she heard it, footsteps approaching, slow, deliberate. The intruder was coming closer, closer to her bedroom, closer to where she lay. Her heart was pounding, and she could hear his faint breathing, slow, almost deliberate. He was standing just outside the doorway, no doubt looking in, trying to make out his silhouette. The moments passed like hours. My mother couldn't move, couldn't even make a sound. She could only watch, frozen in place, as the shadow loomed in the doorway. The man stood motionless for what felt like an eternity, his shadow stretching across the room as he slowly, methodically scanned the room with a creepy look. And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. My mother lay there, her body shaking with relief and fear, unsure of what to do next. She waited, barely breathing, until she heard the front door close clearly. My mother stood still, her heart pounding in her chest, and she didn't dare move. The room was eerily silent now, the only sound the rapid pounding of her own pulse echoing in her ears. Every inch of her body trembled, a mix of adrenaline, fear, and confusion. Was she imagining things? Number, she knew what she had heard. He was real, he was there, and he was gone. She forced herself to move slowly, cautiously, her body still stiff with shock. She groped in the darkness, her hand finding the edge of the nightstand. She fumbled for the lamp, desperate to fill the room with light. As soon as the soft light of the lamp illuminated the space, she felt a moment of comfort, but it was quickly overshadowed by a lingering sense of dread. With trembling hands, my mother reached for the phone on the nightstand, dialing the police with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times, though she had never dialed in such a state of terror. When the line came through, she gave them her address and explained what had happened, though she could barely keep her voice steady. Her words were rushed. The police arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. As they stepped inside, my mother couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still somewhere nearby, watching, waiting. The officers, though calm and professional, couldn't offer any answers beyond what she already knew. The intruder had only taken a few dollars from her purse, and it seemed he had no intention of harming her. Still, the fear of having someone nearby, someone unfamiliar and dangerous, made her tremble. The officer nodded and looked down at the photo again, then back at my mother with a slight frown. "Are you sure? Because this man, he's the one we're investigating right now. He's been in trouble before, and he just got out of jail last week. We've got our eyes on him." My mother's heart sank. The officer's words were like a punch to the gut. This man who had stood at her door, who had made her blood run cold, he wasn't a stranger. He had been in jail, and now he was out. "I'm sorry," the officer said, his voice sincere but stern. "But there's not much we can do unless we have more information. We'll let you know if we get any new leads." That was the last thing they said of the man. They never mentioned his name, or she often wondered in the dark what had kept her safe. Why had he left her unharmed when he could have easily done worse? And more than anything, she wondered if she had really seen the last of him. If he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. My mother never really found peace after that night. Though she tried to live a normal life, the events of that evening haunted her, creeping into her dreams, stealing her rest. And as for me, I couldn't help but wonder, as the years passed, the haunting memories of that night faded from my mother's mind, but they were never completely erased. The trauma had been seared into her soul, leaving scars that were invisible, but always there, lurking just beneath the surface. It wasn't just the fear of the intruder that stayed with her. It was the question that haunted her. Why had he left her unharmed? What did he want, and why did he choose her? Over time, she tried to push those thoughts away, focusing on her life, her family, her future. But every now and then, in the silence of the night, she would catch herself staring into the darkness, her mind replaying the dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. The question of whether the man would ever return continued to torment her, but she tried not to let it. It wasn't until years later, when I was old enough to understand, that I learned more about the strange chain of events that surrounded that night. My mother never shared all the details with me, but one day when I was a teenager, she finally opened up. She told me that she had heard gossip about that man, the man who had walked into our apartment, who had stood at the foot of her bed. There were rumors among the people who lived in the area, rumors that made her shudder. Some said he was a ghost, a specter who had haunted the area for years. Preying on the, as my mother shared this with me, I felt a chill run down my spine. I realized that we had never really understood what had happened that night, what had driven the man into our home, and why he had disappeared without a trace. It was as if the event itself was part of something much larger, something beyond our understanding. Was it fate that had kept my mother safe? Or was it something else, something else? I often wonder if the man in the dark ever returned to our neighborhood, to the house where we used to live. Was he still roaming the streets looking for another victim? Or did he simply disappear? The truth, I suppose, is that we will never know. But one thing is certain, that night changed us all. My mother, a strong and independent woman, was never the same again. She became more cautious, more aware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, even in the most familiar places. And for me, I could never look at the dark the same way again. It wasn't. But in the end, maybe that's what makes this story so chilling. The unknown, the unanswered questions. The man in the dark may never be fully understood, but his presence is a reminder that there are forces in this world that we cannot control, that we cannot predict. Sometimes the scariest things are. As for my mother, she eventually found a way to move on, to build a new life in a new home, far from the place that had been our refuge. But she never forgot what happened that night, and in a way, neither did I. We survived the darkness, but the darkness left its mark on us, and that mark will never fade. The man in the dark may be gone from our lives, but his shadow will always remain, a ghost in the corner of our minds, reminding us that there is always more to the world than meets the eye. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson we can learn, that sometimes the scariest thing in the world is not knowing what's going on in the dark. Wait, do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Number 2, strange occurrences in the apartment. It was the fall of my younger sister's first year at UCLA. She was thrilled to start this new chapter of her life, and after much searching, she chose a cozy apartment across from the Los Angeles National Cemetery. I thought it was an odd choice at first. Living next to a cemetery just felt off, but she was excited, and it wasn't my place to say anything. My father and I helped her move in, carrying her boxes of clothes, books, and personal items into the small apartment. As we settled her in, the place seemed typical enough for a college student, a little run down, but filled with potential. It was only after we left that my father started speaking about the strange feeling he got from the apartment. "I didn't want to say anything earlier," he muttered, "but something's not right about that place. I'm not sure it's safe for her to stay there." My father wasn't one to easily express fear or unease. He was a respected doctor, and despite being deeply scientific in his work, he had always carried an air of mysticism with him. Over the years, he had shared stories of inexplicable things he had seen, visions, eerie encounters with the supernatural, and inexplicable predictions that came true. It wasn't superstition, it was his truth. It was difficult to dismiss his warnings as, "What do you mean?" I asked, a bit skeptical. I didn't notice anything strange. He looked at me with a mix of concern and caution. I don't know how to explain it, but I saw something shadowy, something that didn't belong. It moved so quickly across the room, and the next thing I knew, it was gone. But the feeling stuck with me. I can't shake it off. I tried to brush it off, but as I thought back to the move-in day, I recalled a strange chill that had passed through. Lisa would sometimes hear her name called from the living room when she was alone in her room, but when she went out to check, no one would be there. Once she swore she felt a cold gust of wind pass through her, even though all the windows were tightly shut. Things went missing, her books, her shoes, small items like pens or notebooks, only to reappear in places she was sure they hadn't been. It started to F, but it wasn't until one evening that the strange events took a darker turn. My father and I had planned to visit her one weekend. We hadn't been to her apartment in a while, so it seemed like the perfect time. The moment we stepped into the apartment, the air felt heavy. It wasn't just the dust in the corners or the clutter of a college student's room. It was something more. The room had a strange energy to it, a tension that seemed to pulse. Lisa greeted us with a forced smile, but there was something in her eyes, something that told me she hadn't been sleeping well. My father, ever the perceptive one, immediately noticed the change in her. He said nothing, but I could tell he was already scanning the room, his eyes narrowing as if he were searching for something. We sat down in the living room, and that's when it happened. A shadow moved across the wall. It was quick, too quick to be anything natural. It darted across the room and disappeared behind the curtains. My father stood up immediately. His face was pale. I tried to rationalize it. It must have been the light, a trick of the eye. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The shadow had been too solid, too real. My father walked toward the window at the far end of the room, where we found it slightly ajar. But when we checked it, the window was locked from the inside. Impossible for the wind to have pushed it open. The sensation of being watched was so strong that I couldn't shake the feeling that... Then came the whispers. Soft at first, barely audible, but growing clearer as we stood there. "Lisa, Lisa." The voice was unmistakable, calling her name. We turned, but there was no one there. I looked over at my father, who was now clutching his amulet, a small, worn charm that had been passed down through the generations. "Hi," he began to chant in a language I didn't understand, his voice steady despite the growing cold in the room. The whispers stopped suddenly, replaced by an eerie silence. But the air felt thick, as if it were pressing down on us. My father motioned for us to follow him. He reached the hallway, and I followed him hesitantly. That's when a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its limbs jerked and twitched as though it were struggling to hold its form. Its face was a twisted, hollow mask, part human, part something else. It stood at the far end of the hallway, just staring at us with cold, empty eyes. "I fox her." My father raised his hand and the figure recoiled. With a violent shift, it vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but an oppressive silence. My heart was pounding in my chest. I looked at my father, who nodded solemnly. That was no ordy. We didn't waste another second. We packed up everything, and Lisa and I left the apartment for good that night. I never spoke much about it after that, but the fear stayed with me, and I could see it in Lisa's eyes too. She had changed after that night, more cautious, more distant. The fear she had felt in that apartment lingered in her expression, even in the truth about the apartment came out soon after we left. It turned out that the building had been built on land once used for dark rituals, ancient practices that called upon forces not meant for human understanding. The cemetery next door only seemed to add to the sinister energy of the place. Every tenant who lived there experienced strange OC. As the years passed, Lisa and I managed to move on, or at least we tried to. Life moved forward in a way that made us forget, or so we thought, about that cursed apartment. Lisa had graduated and settled into a new place, and I had my own life to focus on. But something within me always felt a quiet unease, an unshakable feeling that the apartment's darkness hadn't fully left us. One evening, years after we'd moved out, Lisa called me late at night. Her voice was shaky, and there was an urgency I hadn't heard in years. "Vanan," she whispered, I think it's back." I froze. The room felt colder suddenly, the air thick with memories of the past. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight with fear. "I've been hearing it again, whispers in the night, footsteps behind me when no one's around. But last night was different." Her voice cracked, and I could almost feel her terror through the phone. "It was in my room, standing right next to my bed. I could feel it breathing, cold and heavy." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. It had been so long since the incident. Why was it coming back now? I told her to stay calm, but deep down I felt the same dread creeping back into my bones. The next day, we decided to visit the old apartment. I don't know why we did it, whether it was curiosity or the need to face whatever was haunting us, but something pulled us back. As we stood before the building, the air around us felt suffocating. The once familiar surroundings now seemed foreign, almost hostile. The windows of the apartment were dark, the building silent. It was as if it were waiting for us. Lisa hesitated, but I took her hand. "Let's just go inside," I urged, though my voice trembled. We made our way up to the apartment door, and as I reached for the doorknob, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The air felt thick, as though something or someone was watching us. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed in the silence. Inside, nothing had changed. The same wallpaper, the same creaking floorboards. But it was colder now. I could see my breath in the air. The apartment felt wrong, as though it had been waiting for us, ready to pull us back into its twisted grip. We walked in cautiously, and as we moved deeper into the apartment, I heard it. A faint sound, like whispers, faint but growing louder. They were coming from the farthest corner of the room, just near the window where my father had seen the shadow years ago. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as the whispers turned into words I could barely make out. "Get out! Get out! You shouldn't have come back." I froze. Lisa grabbed my arm, her grip tight with fear. The air grew colder still. And then, from the corner, a shadow moved. It was not like before, quick and fleeting. It was slow, deliberate, stretching out across the room like it was growing in the dark. It began to take shape, forming into a figure, tall and gaunt, its limbs twisted and unnatural. Its face was a hollow mask, just as it had been years ago, its eyes glowing with an eerie, sickly light. "Lisa," I whispered, but my voice cracked, barely a sound. It moved toward us. And in that instant, I knew it wasn't just an apparition. It was something more. It was a presence, a force that had been waiting for us, a darkness that could not be shaken off. Not now, not ever. Suddenly I felt it, a heavy pressure in the air, like something was closing in around us, suffocating us. The figure took another step closer, and the ground beneath our feet seemed to shift. I could feel my body freezing, unable to move, as if the very air had turned to ice. The whispers became clearer now, each word cutting through the silence like a knife. "You're not supposed to leave. You belong here, with us." I looked at Lisa, and in that moment I saw the terror in her eyes, the same fear I had felt all those years ago. She was no longer just my sister, she was a part of this nightmare, bound by it in a way I didn't understand. But I knew we had to leave, now. We turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a deafening thud, trapping us inside. The shadow was closer now, almost upon us. I could feel its presence creeping into my mind, its whispers filling every corner of my thoughts, urging me to stay, to give in. And just as we thought we were trapped, my father's voice echoed through the apartment, calling out to us from the darkness. "Get out now, run!" With all the strength I had left, I grabbed Lisa's hand and ran toward the door, my heart racing, the whispers growing louder and more frantic. We reached the door, and with a desperate shove, I pushed it open. The cold, damp air of the outside world hit us, and we stumbled out into the night. But even as we stood in the safety of the street, I felt it. The lingering presence, the cold breath on the back of my neck, the whispers, now just barely audible, still calling our names. And I knew deep down that the apartment's darkness had never truly left us. It was always waiting, always watching, and it would never let go. No matter how far we ran, no matter how much time passed, that shadow, those whispers, would always be a part of us. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Number 3. The Haunted Cabin Story. I am a 24-year-old woman who moved to a new neighborhood with my dog in November. The neighborhood is known for its hipster vibe, quirky cafes, art galleries, and boutiques, although the crime rate is higher than other areas. However, I really enjoy the atmosphere, with great bars, restaurants, and dog parks where my dog can run around freely. I found an apartment on the ground floor of a 6-unit building, and I am the only one living there. The building is quiet, with a security gate in the front, but the back door is unlocked, allowing anyone to enter the apartment. Although I was a little worried about the security, I was pleased that the area was quite close to my favorite places. As soon as I moved in, I started to feel that something was wrong. My dog suddenly became ill and started having seizures every time he ate. After taking him to the vet, they couldn't figure out what was wrong. He didn't show any signs of anything other than seizures, but I felt something strange whenever he was alone in the apartment. When I went to work, he would always seem restless, licking his fur or barking constantly, even though no one was in the house except me. One night while I was sleeping, I suddenly heard a strange noise outside the window, like someone was standing outside. At first I didn't pay much attention, but when my dog started barking like crazy, I felt an invisible unease. I opened the door, but there was no one there. Although nothing happened that night, the dog continued to act strangely, and I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. The dog continued to act very differently, always showing fear when alone in the apartment. Every time I returned, it would lick its fur or bark continuously as if it saw something I couldn't see. The feeling of presence in the apartment became more and more obvious. At times I felt like I was being watched even though no one was around. Soft sounds like whispers, footsteps. A dark scene as I sat on, my dog suddenly stood still, looking straight into the dark corner of the room. I got up and walked closer and saw a dark shadow passing by the window, as if someone had just walked by. I looked out but saw no one. I thought it might be just my imagination, but regardless of the increasing in me. From then on, my apartment seemed to be covered by a cold, heavy air. The strange sounds every night were no longer a strange thing. I felt as if the room was not C. One day, while I was at work, I received a call from a close friend. While telling the story, I told her about the strange phenomena that had occurred in the apartment. She kept quiet for a while and then advised me to learn more about the history of this neighborhood. At first I didn't care much, but then I decided to try to find out. The results I discovered terrified me. This neighborhood used to be home to the poor and homeless. Many years ago, some people went missing in projects that were never solved. It is recorded that many people who lived in these houses encountered strange phenomena. The building I am in is a haven for unliberated souls. These souls still linger here, and I am not sad to know that I have become one. One night, when the room was dark, I heard a knock on the door again, a clear sound. I felt the tension rising in me. I opened the door, but looked outside. There was no one. When I turned back, a small piece of paper appeared on the table, on which was a terrifying message: "Neen will never leave here." I could not stop being afraid. My feeling at this moment was like being trapped in an indefinite period of time, unable to escape. These spirits, these invisible forces, had used the space around me. The cold surrounds and the events of the day, and see, one night when everything returns, you breathe and I can't sleep, I begin to feel the change. The surroundings around me seem to be clearing. The space is tense and cold. The feeling of difficulty breathing is getting heavier and heavier, and I can't figure out what's going on. Everything is like being massaged. An invisible force is controlling everything. I feel like I'm lost in another world, a world where all the strange efforts, the signs of the soul not yet released, seem to have reached its peak. One night, when I was getting ready for bed, the apartment suddenly became engulfed in a thick fog, making it impossible for me to see anything around me. Strange noises rang out from everywhere, footsteps, whispering noises that I couldn't understand clearly, I couldn't bear. When I turned around to look, a dark figure appeared right in front of me. Its eyes had no color, just two deep black pools, and I could feel the coldness emanating from it. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I was taken out, unable to escape, only able to stand and watch its presence, feeling the I realized that I was trapped in a world I couldn't escape. Dead souls, invisible forces, all of them had taken advantage of this place, and I was a part of it. This apartment, this neighborhood had become one of mine, and I would always be a part of it. As I stood in the darkness, unable to take my eyes off the blackness in front of me, I felt a sense of dread, as if its presence was slowly overwhelming me. Every step I took felt heavy, as if I was being engulfed in an invisible space. I looked over at my dog, who was also standing still, but his eyes held a deep understanding of what was happening, something I had never truly realized. Spirits, forces I could not understand, had now taken over this apartment, and I was a part of it. Not just a person living there, but the whispers in the air grew clearer, as if they were calling my name. I felt a chill from within my body, spreading throughout my body. Memories of the strange things that had happened during that time seemed to flood my mind. The strange noises, the flashing lights, and especially the feeling that someone was always watching me were all clear signs that I had been drawn into a vortex from which I could not escape. The walls of the apartment seemed to be shrinking. The space around me became extremely suffocating. I turned and looked at my dog, whose eyes were now dim, as if he had realized that things would never be the same again. His fear now merged with the fear in my heart. I felt that not only I, but all the souls who had disappeared before existed in this space, along with indelible memories. His apartment is no longer my home. It has become my tomb. I cannot escape. I cannot free myself. Any attempt will only lead me deeper into the darkness, where I will be forever bound. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Number 4. Haunted Apartment. In 2015, I decided to move into a small apartment in a quiet but somewhat escapist part of the city. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building that had not been renovated for a long time. The hallways were gloomy and dark, with yellow lighting helping to dim the atmosphere, making the atmosphere even more gloomy every time I entered. On windy nights, I could hear the wind whistling through the old windows, creating strange sounds like someone whispering. Although I lived alone and enjoyed the quiet, a sense of unease quietly crept into my heart every night. At first, I thought it was just the new disruption of the place, a strange place that made me feel uncomfortable. But after only a few weeks, I began to notice things that could not be solved. One evening, while sitting in the living room working, I heard strange sounds coming from the bedroom. Maybe someone was rummaging through the utilities. I thought it might be a mouse or something that had accidentally fallen on the floor, but when I entered the room, everything was. However, the unpleasant sensations continued to increase. Encouraged, I heard footsteps moving around the apartment, although there was definitely no one there. Sometimes I still found things on my desk to change their position without any reason that could be explained. The feeling was that there might be something invisible, observing and influencing the things around me. One night in particular, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a dark figure in the corner of the room. Its red eyes were staring at me, as if it could see into my soul. I couldn't move, I could only stare at it in confusion until the shadow. And then another night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a knock on the door. At first I thought it might be someone visiting, but when I opened the door, no one was found. However, the knocking on the door came again, this time stronger and clearer. A strange feeling rose within me, making me feel like I was being watched. I closed the door and did not open it again, although the knocking noise continued to ring as if to drown out all the sounds in the apartment. Just like that, there was someone standing outside the door, showing up and waiting. I wanted to have to. The next day, I felt so anxious that I had to call a close friend to share the strange things that had happened. My friend advised me to move out immediately, but I could not let it go so easily. I decided to stay, not because I was not afraid, but because I wanted to find out what these stories really were. And it was from this decision that I gradually discovered that the things that happened in this apartment were not coincidences or my imagination. This apartment has a dark hole, a hole that no one CA week later, I happened to meet the building manager and asked about the history of the apartment. He looked at me strangely before telling me about a woman who used to live in this apartment. She died in a mysterious accident, the cause of which is unknown, and since then, many people who have lived here have encountered strange symbols. I listened without being able to shudder, and surprisingly, I realized that maybe I was not simply an old apartment anymore. Maybe I had accidentally entered a space whose past still had time, still existed in the walls, in the air, and in the very cold that I felt. That feeling kept haunting me until I decided that I could no longer continue to guarantee it and had to leave. But what I had experienced was still not easily forgotten. Whenever I think back to that apartment, I still can't shake the cold, defiant feeling as if I'd never really left. And a question echoes in my mind. Will the ghosts of the past forever dwell in this place, or will they follow? Even though I had left the apartment, I could not escape the nightmares that place left in me. The knocking on the door, the shadow with glowing red eyes, and the feeling that someone was watching me were always present in my mind. Every night when I dreamed, I found myself back in that apartment in a cold, dark space, a place that could never be peaceful. The strange symbols did not stop. A week after I left, I decided to go back to the apartment again, not because I wanted to live there, but because I needed to understand more about what had happened. I needed to know what the apartment really was, and if I was the only one who had experienced those things. When I entered the old building, a suffocating feeling told me that the boss was coming to me. Everything had changed. The hallways were dark, the smell of damp was strong, but the strangest feeling was that I felt a presence, a dead silence. I intended to go up to the third floor, where my previous apartment decision was discussed. Every step on the stairs echoed with strange sounds, as if something was watching me from behind. Until I stood in front of the old apartment, I felt that I should not continue to enter, but I couldn't. The door was still the same, but when I opened it, a cold wind blew out from the room, chilling to my level. Inside the apartment, nothing had changed much. The decorations were still there, but everything seemed to be covered in a thick layer of dust. Maybe it had been abandoned for many years. However, one strange thing was that I felt a small change, an interface that was currently invisible but clear. The room seemed to be looking at me, observing my every move. I intended to walk around the apartment decision. As if I wanted to face, I turned around to look, and that dark shadow of the dream disappeared as if it had never existed. The door closed behind me, and the silence around me became constant. I could no longer bail. I hurried away, not looking back. But when I got to the ground floor, I felt that the apartment had not let me go. Like what I had experienced was not random, but part of a longer story that I could not solve. The next day, I met the building manager again, and this time I asked him about what I had just experienced. He looked at me with a knowing look, as if he had known this question would come to me. "There are things that cannot be explained within these walls," he said, his voice low and haunting. "The woman who lived there, she didn't just die in an accident. She left a very strong mark." I didn't understand everything he said, but the feeling of unease rose within me once again. That change, I couldn't stop thinking about the manager's answers. Had I really entered a space heard by the past? And would those ghostly materials, those strange phenomena, continue to follow me firmly for the rest of my life? The answer was still a question mark, but I knew that I would never forget Since leaving, I couldn't escape the feeling of being followed, an invisible but always felt presence. What had happened was not over. And with each quiet night, I wondered, was there someone still wandering in the old apartment, or was it me who could never escape that haunting? I left the apartment, the feeling of unease still lingering. The nightmares, the shadows, the knocking at the door at any time were always in my mind. Every night I wondered if I had truly escaped it, or if everything had just stopped for that moment. The strange phenomena did not just happen once, but continued to exist as a defect in my mind. I looked at him, not knowing how to answer. The past was still there, like scars that could not be healed. "Do those ghosts really exist?" I asked, my voice soft. The manager looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, those ghosts are not always the souls of the deceased. Sometimes they are memories, strong emotions that people leave behind. And there are places, spaces where those memories never fade." His words made me suddenly realize that perhaps I did not only encounter ghosts, but also emotions, memories that were compressed in that space. And even though I tried to go far away, the traces of the past still lingered around me, like a haunting in my mind. He was gentle, of course, but his eyes were still full of sympathy. "Maybe it wasn't because of you, but because you came at the right time, at the right place. Sometimes people are just people who accidentally step into a story that began long before they appeared." I don't know if what he said is true, but I can't deny that what I experienced was real. Ghosts, strange phenomena, are things I can't solve. And whether I want to forget them or not, the memories of that apartment still echo in my mind every day. In the end, I understood that not every little thing in life can be solved. Sometimes strange things, unsolvable phenomena, are just a part of life that we can't control. And whether I run away or not, the ghosts of the past will always follow me, until I learned to accept them as an inseparable part of myself. The next day, I went back to the old apartment, not to live there, but to face what I had experienced. And as I stood there looking at the pictures, the walls were bare, and I felt something strange, like I wasn't afraid anymore. The ghosts, the knocking, the shadows with glowing red eyes. They didn't control me anymore. I wasn't a victim of those phenomena. I was the only one who could decide. And as I turned away for the last time, I no longer felt afraid. That apartment still held my image, but I knew that I would never let the past control my life again. Those ghosts may have existed in that time, but they couldn't change me. The story of the current apartment will always be a part of me, but I have learned to move on. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest. iMoon,